There are few races that have survived well in the Age of Chaos. The bulk of those that do, they survive because they're either a warlike people like the Oryx, and others survive because of their stubbornness, defenses, or elusiveness, think Daughters of Cain or Fire Slayers for example. But one race stands alone for using their intelligence, science, and cunning to not only survive the Age of Chaos, but to thrive during it. This week we are diving into the Kharadron Overlords. This is one of the most enigmatic races in Age of Sigmar. The Kharadron Overlords are a race that is shrouded in mystery, and we will explore who they are, how they survived the Age of Chaos, how they currently function, what their leadership and soldiers are like, and those amazing aircraft that give them the gift of flight. But in this video, we're going to explore their origins. How does a race so iconic to mining and subterranean kingdoms find its home in the clouds? Well, we find a great deal of information about them in the core book. Specifically, if you look at the lore for the Realm of Metal, Chaman. Now, recently I did a video on the Realm of Metal itself, and I kind of put a footnote in there about the Kharadron Overlords, but if you want to learn more about the realm itself, which really is their origin point, I do suggest checking out that video. To briefly summarize the lore there, it's a realm that's made in the image of Grugni, one of the two Duardin gods. It's a place of rich resources, metal, jewels, and all those things lead to great commerce and trade. The continent, or the region that the core book focuses on, is called the Spiral Crux, and it's basically a series of islands carved by Grugni. These islands are very heavily inhabited by Duardin and humans, and it is a place of technological and mercantile achievement. With physical resources and a lot of ingenuity, they were able to create technological wonders like flying machines, got gyrocopters and such. And they soon discovered, this moment they lifted off from the ground, an exciting new resource. It's called ether gold. Ether gold is also called the breath of Grugni. And this is sort of a metal that has magical and alchemical properties, but it's in a gaseous state, rather than being a solid. Now, we've seen metals in other states before, most famously is mercury, which is more of a liquid, but ether gold hides amongst the clouds in a gas-like form. Now, the terminology they use to describe the mining process of ether gold is very reminiscent of things you would see in the ground. So they would call a big patch of ether gold within a cloud, oh, that's a vein, much like we would say there's a vein of ore in the earth. Of course, to mine, quote-unquote, ether gold is very hard and dangerous because you have to get into a ship, get up into the air, survive all the different atmospheric dangers up there, collect, sift, and contain the ether gold and bring it back down. But when you do, the payoff is nearly immeasurable because it's not just metal, it has powerful magical properties. The first and foremost is that it acts as a power source. And the secondary effect, which is also extremely relevant and important, is that it can kind of create a field where gravity gets toyed with. I would say it's magical levitation, but the Kharadron Overlords don't really rely or think about magic. They don't perceive ether gold as being magical, they just think it's science that they're still researching. Now, advancements on studying ether gold took them very far. They were able to create incredible new machines with this new access to a reliable power source, innovative new technologies like engines and mining tools, and most importantly, it drove the field of aviation. They were able to use ether gold to build large ships that could fly. These ships could be built with cargo holds to bring back more ether gold, and kind of the entire process would start again. Trade was great, and the resource was both plentiful and highly in demand. And with so many ships flying in and out, ports became very congested. Now, it's like a real-world airport that cannot support the amount of ground traffic that it gets. So a solution was made. We're going to build a skyport, a levitating docking station so that ships can resupply, refuel, and clear out their cargo. And this really was the budding age of technology for the Duardin and the humans in Chaman. Because all these things, as we're talking about them in the book, and as far as the timeline goes, very, very new technology, very experimental. And what's terrible is that something horrible is happening in another part of the realm. Because while all these things were being invented and experimented with and kind of toyed around, Tzeentch Chaos God, was trying to claw his way into Chamon. Now, I went over the kind of in-depth story about how he got into the realm on the realm video itself, but I'm just going to briefly summarize here. A giant rift tears open in the sky, and Tzeentch demons begin pouring through in mass. And their numbers are such that nothing can stand against them. The Duardin who go to their big fortresses and seal the doors, well, those fortresses become a prison, and now they're trapped, and eventually Tzeentch is able to claw through the doors and the walls and the windows, and they all just die. The flying demons terrorize the sky, shooting gouts of flame, and whole armies of horrors scour every foot of the ground. Any opposition that was organized fell apart at the feet of the Tzeentch demons. No fortress could stand against them, no hold was secure, no tribe was out of reach. And they were fighting this continuously losing battle. The remaining Duardin were pushed back and back and back to their furthest mountain keeps, and they saw nowhere else to go to. But in these taller keeps, there were docked a number of airships, and so the Duardin poured into the available skyships that they could find, because there was simply nowhere else to run to. And out of this mountain, a surge of skyships flew out. Now, to the Duardin's surprise, they were able to tear through the flying demons with ease. They thought it would be much more difficult, that they were on their last leg, but the flying ships and the guns that they had put on them were able to really shoot down the screamers and any other random flying demons. And immediately they realized this was their solution, because these airships had just become their lifeboats. But instead of taking them from, a sinking ship to solid ground like a normal lifeboat would, this is reverse, where I have to leave solid ground because it's so inhospitable right now. And with that, they were raised up to the sky. Now, it must be hard to express the level of pandemonium at play here, because these scattered remnants of survivors have lost literally everything. Their family, their friends, their home, their realm. But they are alive for now, and you have to make it work. And so these scattered ships all came together to try and make a solution. Because at this point, they're functionally refugees with nowhere to land, and nothing around them is safe. All the ships link together, and they link to one of the nearby skyports. And they collectively become the first city in the clouds. Now, this reprieve, this break, was temporary at best. Once the immediate threat of survival was over, the next challenge was keeping this budding city afloat, because they needed to keep mining ether gold at now an unprecedented level. The entire civilization relies on keeping these ships afloat. And arguments quickly broke out as mining operations collided with one another. The local vein of ether gold was almost tapped out and riots were brewing. Remember, this single resource keeps their personal ships in the sky, but it also keeps their society moving. And with resources so low and the stakes so high, these little disparate factions of Duardin were near the brink of civil war. Now, at this point, the leader of each ship or clan, if they were organized by families, met together to try and find a solution. This was called the famous Council of Madrasah. And the crux of the meeting was to say, okay, we've survived, but we need to come up with some kind of governing structure. Because if we don't, we're going to have survived only to kill ourselves later on. They saw the events of what went down in the realms as Grugni abandoning them. Their god didn't come to help them, so they needed to figure out things for themselves. How do we interact with each other in a healthy way? How can we not prey and steal from one another? And basically asking the question, how do we take our values, our justice, and our society and translate it to our current survival method? Because life looks different now, we need to become something different. We need to adapt. And this meeting was instrumental in forming the Code. This is the most important concept to understanding Kharadron Overlords. We're going to come back to it numerous times throughout the week. Everything we're going to talk about is influenced by it, because it is a system of government, trade structure, business law, and worldview wrapped into one. It dictates how these skyports will survive without hurting one another, how individual trade companies will work for themselves, but also as part of the greater whole, how captain and crew interact, any obligations, trade structure, communication, everything, if you haven't figured it out. It's the rule of law that makes this lifestyle sustainable. And one important thing it also does, we're going to touch on a little bit when we talk about troops and stuff like that, is the idea that the old clans, the random family lineages that Duardin were traditionally very attached to like the deeds of their family and what their clan has accomplished. All that, the slate got wiped clean. There are no more clans. You're just a person who has to earn their keep. So everything went from being a lineage system to a merit-based system, which is a really hard right turn when you think about traditional dwarves or Duardin. Now, after the Council of Madrasah, the Kharadron Overlords, as we know them, were born. The various skyports broke apart from each other in search of fresh veins of ether gold, and so all across the skies of the mortal realms. The Duardin sought riches, fame, and survival. They saw the carnage below them in the Age of Chaos, but they couldn't do anything to help, because they are also themselves are refugees and survivors, and you don't risk your only life raft. And so from this bleak start, time began to change them. Entire generations existed that were not born on land. They have no memory of living on the soil. Survival turned into stability, stability turned to growth, and growth turned into a thriving civilization. Cobbled together ports were expanded and grew into powerful new cities, and time took refugees and made them into a true civilization. And we're going to dive into what the Kharadron Overlords are like now, what they've morphed and grown into in tomorrow's video. But let's stop here when I talk about the origin stories, because this comes exclusively from the core book. Why does this story make them a cool faction? Well, first off, I love their origins. I think it's so unique that their technological marvels became their life raft overnight. It's a desperate need rather than a crowning achievement. That kind of change in how you view a technology. And I love how it inverts the idea of a lifeboat, like I talked about earlier. Usually a lifeboat takes you from one dangerous place to safe solid ground. Safe solid ground doesn't exist now, so it takes you to the dangerous place of the skies, but that's still somehow safer because of Tzeentch. And also, I just love the fact that they are so relatable right after their escape. In the real world, once immediate danger is over, we tend to squabble. That's why you'll see people in terrible survival situations, they kind of break apart because the transition from a terrible event to trying to survive and work together afterwards is a hard one for some to do. In addition to that, their solution is equally fascinating. So the code is just a cool idea. No other faction has such a unifying ideology and societal structure that they cling to. Now, we're going to talk about the different skyports and fleets and things like that, and they all kind of look at the code and relate to it a bit differently, but fundamentally they're all as a race on the same general page, which is not something you can say for every faction in the game. Their emphasis on science and technology over magic and sorcery gives us this kind of fascinating idea, right? Their minds, their intelligence conquered their extinction. And because of innovation and technology and sciences and devotion to those things, they were able to survive the worst cataclysm in the history of the realms. And I think that kind of lends itself to a few worldviews that might be very interesting, such as the idea of like, there's nothing we can't learn to overcome, right? There's no puzzle that we can't solve. There's no magic, in quotes, that we can't understand as science, and I kind of think that's a super unique concept. And so in tomorrow's video, we're going to explore how these kind of humble beginnings grow into a fully functional society and what that does to a Duardin. If you are at all interested in Kharadron Overlords, or you'd like to learn more about them, please consider subscribing or sharing this video with someone who would. Thank you all so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in tomorrow's video.